There's a few ways of getting a player involved with a game. Good games use engaging gameplay, bad games tend to use motion controls, it really is that simple. But some people don't play a game for the gameplay. These people are very strange. But no, it does bring up a good point. You can pretend that you don't care a jot about the plot or any of the characters, but ultimately you're in control of someone who has goals and ambitions that the player should empathise with. Maybe you'll be in charge of a silent protagonist who you can use as an imprint of the kind of character you want, but as soon as they open their mouths, all sorts of bullshit can fall out. Part of it can be down to the writing, but most of the time the character you're in control of isn't meant to be a character you can't stand. Making a protagonist someone you're supposed to hate actually takes a bit of effort. Doing it accidentally would be funny if you didn't have to get through a whole game of trying to put up with their shenanigans. You don't always have to give me a character that I should root for, but at the very least give me someone who I don't want to stick in front of a train. I can do that, you know. Video games let you do anything. Protagonists are divided by their motivations. Whether you're saving a princess from a giant lizard or just a really big fan of rapping, it does help if you're being strung along in a quest that you can get behind. The first Watch Dogs game has many failings, most of which the sequel fixed, but few problems are as jarring as how the characters are written. The game is practically drowning in cliches and the kind of tropes that I can't stand these days, but it doesn't get much worse than the main man, Aiden Pearce. I don't want to bang on about the original E3 trailer, but even without really doing anything, Aiden Pearce manages to come off as basically Batman with a phone and a baseball cap. There's a mental image I didn't need. Aiden Pearce's primary source of motivation isn't to rid the world of the hidden forces that invade and warp our lives to suit their needs. Nah, that'd be really cool. Instead, he's keen to avenge the death of his niece, who died after a car crash arranged after one of his jobs went a bit wrong. It's a little bit cliched, but you know, we can work with that. Oh, it's never shown in the game? Must be really important then. I get that hackers maybe aren't the most charismatic people on the planet, but Aiden Pearce is a paint-by-numbers protagonist where every colour is either beige or brown. What you end up doing in Watch Dogs is inherently pretty fun, since not many games have tackled hacking in this way, and it's fun to explore the options you have to take down guards or infiltrate a building. Hearing and seeing Aiden Pearce as this gruff, super serious character who takes no joy in what he's doing doesn't line up at all with what you're doing to meet his goals. There's a brilliant term to describe this that I was only recently reminded of called ludonarrative dissonance, effectively where the character behaves one way but in the hands of the player they act completely differently. When combined with someone as desperately generic as Aiden Pearce with his lackluster motive, it's very hard to find anything to like about him, which is only compounded further when you play the sequel and find that his replacement Marcus Holloway is infinitely more fun. Pretty sure Pearce would have been overdressed as San Francisco anyway. Final Fantasy protagonists tend to fall into one of two categories. They're either silent protagonists or protagonists that you wish were silent. I'm only half joking. There's a few that do their job very nicely, but also a handful that are a little too on the nose or in your face. Still, at least they're showing some kind of character traits that I'm sure some people will latch onto. After all, for how annoyed you might be by Tidus or Cloud, at least they do things in their respective games. In Final Fantasy XII, a game that I feel that large parts of the internet have forgotten about, you spend the game controlling someone made of cardboard. He doesn't laugh like an idiot, but I wish he did. And yet, what's really interesting about Vaan is that he kind of isn't the main character, but you're controlling him anyway. Having the controllable character being a supporting act isn't necessarily a bad idea that I feel could work in another setting and with a more engaging cast of characters. As it is here, Vaan is a soulless vessel that stands idly by while the events of the game unfold in front of him. He's effectively a botched attempt at being a silent protagonist who ultimately doesn't say or do anything of any significance in the game. As someone who you then need to imprint yourself on, Vaan doesn't really do enough to warrant being the focus of the attention. I've seen a few articles that compare Final Fantasy XII with Star Wars, with every main character being a mirror of someone from A New Hope. Vaan is basically Luke, but with his motive being that he wants to find out about his dead brother. Once he hears the truth, he's pretty content with the closure and carries on being this one-dimensionally bland character who's just along for the ride. Someone a bit more useful in the story might have been nice. The Star Wars comparison has greater significance than you might think, since Final Fantasy XII's sort of Obi-Wan Bash is a way more interesting character. His brother is a bad guy who was accused of killing his own king. There is much more potential there for an interesting protagonist. Supposedly, Vaughn was chosen because he has a greater appeal to a wider audience. It's for lack of the shirt, isn't it? Trying to live life in a zombie apocalypse tends to be a bit of an uphill struggle, but despite this, it sometimes brings up the kind of circumstances for interesting characters to blossom. That's just an overly fancy way of saying that despite how brainless zombie games can be, there's still plenty of potential for a more deliberate approach towards shooting these almost humans and the relationships that are ruined as quickly as they're developed. That's why we have games like The Walking Dead, where each character has real importance for the story and not just another sack of flesh for a zombie to sink their teeth into when the game needs it. But narrative-wise, it can't really stack up to The Last of Us. That game has a lot of story. It took roughly 15 minutes for Joel to become a relatable protagonist. You can't watch him cradle his dead daughter and not feel your heart of stone crack into little pieces. However, fast forward 20 years and you're in control of a bitter, far more cynical Joel who's had to survive the zombie outbreak with only the preservation of his own life keeping him going. Around about that time, he's tasked with protecting Ellie and develops a father-daughter relationship with her that mirrors the one he had with his late daughter Sarah. They come to blows a few times because zombie apocalypses are stressful, but he does eventually deliver her to the Fireflies, who can use her immunity to the zombies to create a cure. But Joel snaps when he learns this process will kill her and takes her back with the aid of a lot of gunfire, gutting the whole operation in favour of keeping his new daughter figure alive. Which is touching for a little while, but it doesn't escape the fact that this single act completely fucked over humanity. Yes, he's keeping Ellie alive, but at an insane cost. It's understandable since she does act as a replacement for Sarah, but could you imagine how powerful it would have been if he let Ellie go? It would have meant progression for his character, an understanding that his loss is no greater than anyone else's and that Sarah, Tess, Henry and Sam, that all of their deaths weren't in vain now that humanity has a chance. Instead, the cycle is forced to repeat itself for maybe another 20 years until another immunity arises, one that the Fireflies refer to as like nothing they've ever seen. Despite this though, I think it accentuates the story rather than ruins it. It's ambiguous and makes for a thoroughly thought-provoking ending. It's a testament to the qualities of the narrative that stimulates this level of discussion of the relevancy of morality and responsibility in a lawless environment. Can I get behind Joel and his actions? Fuck no, but it does make the game more interesting. And we get a sequel out of all of this. Ready to go around again? It's quite hard to hate a silent protagonist since they don't have as much of an impact on the story. Of course, you can say a lot without uttering a word, but you can also piss off a lot of people by saying or doing stupid shit. Not many characters have made the transition from a silent protagonist to a very vocal one. There's a good reason for that. You can't go on until the end of time making Metroid Prime games, but I do miss them. Frankly, I wouldn't be in that position if what came after was anything to write home about. Metroid Prime Federation Force was a depressingly average game that showed a distinct lack of care for both the conventional features of the FPS genre and more Metroid-y things. I would say that it suggests that the writing is on the wall for Metroid, but that's been the case since Metroid Other M 6 years ago. I'm willing to listen to claims that this game did a few things right, and there's even some gameplay aspects that I can get behind, but my god, what did they do to the story? Not in the kind of way where it just trundles along in the background without you noticing. I mean, this is a fuck up on a grand scale. And no one comes out alive from it. Adam Malkovich is a self-aggrandizing prick who believes that his role as a commander in the Galactic Federation means that he's the most important person in the room, including the legendary bounty hunter Samus Aran, who saved countless planets and destroyed a lot of bad guys. Samus goes along with this because Adam is a former commanding officer and because she's got much bigger problems. Namely, she starts talking and never stops. I get that injecting some emotion into a stoic character gives more of an insight into the reactions to various events in the game, but not this much, and especially not onto a character who's gotten by in every game before without letting everyone know what she thinks of this blade of grass. Samus was always this badass, all-conquering force for good in the universe who turns up, blows up some aliens, and leaves without saying a word. A sudden switch to this more emotionally vulnerable Samus makes very little sense, and is a far cry from how relatable she was before. Having her freak out at the sight of a foe she's defeated many times before ends up feeling artificial and doesn't line up with how the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter would react, or how she's reacted in previous games. You don't make one of the most respected protagonists in all of gaming this much of a melodramatic wet sponge. I remember good Metroid games. Designing a good protagonist is tricky work. There's gotta be a balance between genuine character design that convinces the player that they're in control of someone interesting, while still being enough of a blank slate that the player can live through the protagonist. Not many games get this down, but I'd argue that Devil May Cry picked this up very nicely around the third game in the franchise. Dante is a carefree, fun-loving, highly expressive character who struts around like he owns the place, but never overstays his welcome by being too abrasive or arrogant. He's the comic relief in his own game and makes wisecracks with impeccable timing and brilliant situational awareness. Why you'd want to tear this down in a reboot is beyond me. But hey, we're here anyway. I guess we should learn to love the new Dante in this new stylized take on Devil May Cry. Let's start by listing all the good things. He has black hair, which is a sign that he's a younger Dante, even though it's a separate timeline, which maybe explains why he's such a tremendous douchebag, but I digress. I seriously spent about 30 minutes trying to think up legitimate reasons why he's a good protagonist. I think I need a new hobby. The problem with this version of Dante isn't just that he's a faint shadow compared to what the franchise was built on, but also that the act of rebooting a franchise is effectively stating that you can do better from a clean slate. Which means that Ninja Theory genuinely believes that an insufferable hobo is a step up on the previous guy. That's a problem you need to fix on your own. So, okay, judge the game by its own merits. Even though the small print of Devil May Cry on the box is saying, I'm part of the cool club too, guys! You put Dante's character in any other game and you'd end up with the same result. An overly abrasive personality that is supposed to represent the good in this generic government are doing the bad things world. Maybe it would have worked if he was a deliberately unlikable protagonist, but you're constantly reminded that you're supposed to like him. And I guess you're supposed to smirk at every swear word and childish insult he haphazardly throws around too. Could you ever imagine new Dante being as deliberately melodramatic as old Dante in the fourth game? One of the greatest traits you can ever develop is the ability to laugh at yourself. This being RabbidLuigi, and trading out a cartoon character for this arsehole was an ill-conceived idea from a narrative point of view, but also, crucially, from a series progression standpoint. A reboot is meant to signal the start of a grand reimagining of a franchise with new settings and characters, but DMC didn't sell all that well or get a good reception from fans. It leaves the franchise at a bit of a crossroads about where to go next that hasn't been decided 4 years after. And it was all completely unnecessary. Got a topic that you'd like me to discuss in a countdown? Leave a suggestion in a comment below and head over to my Twitter, where I'll be holding a vote to decide the subject of the next countdown based off the best of your submissions. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that. So this is the end of the top 5s for another year, and I've got to thank you people for coming up with some stellar suggestions for topics that, I wouldn't have managed on my own. That's part of the reason why I decided to do it. More minds working towards it than just me. Anyway, for the last 2 weeks of the year, I'm making top 10s about the worst and best games of the year. And while I've got the best side of that pretty much locked down, I'm still taking suggestions for the worst side. Basically, what's the worst game you've played this year? I've still got time to play them and ruin what's been a great year for me. The lengths I go to please you people.